On December 27th, just days after the Raiders played what is reported to be the final game at the Oakland Coliseum, one of their legends, Warren Wells, died of congestive heart failure at the age of 76. Of the many incredible stories of Raider players, his is the most amazing of all. Just imagine if one of the most dominant receivers in football simply disappeared. Just imagine if a self-help organization turned religion were given the keys to unlock the mind of one of the game's troubled players.
People play games, friend. They lie.
Planet Earth about to be recycled.
You come pointing guns in the direction of my wives and my kids, damn it, I'll meet you at the door anytime.
You don't have to imagine. It happened.
That's too bad. That's too bad.
This man was either the best football player you never heard of, or if you do remember him, you have no idea of exactly what became of Warren Wells.
If he could have played long enough, he could have been the greatest wide receiver that ever played.
He had all the tools. If he'd have played 8 or 10 years, he'd have broke a whole bunch of records. No question about it. I mean, he was a great football player, but it's a mystery what happened to him.
I think he had the potential for being one of the best receivers ever. It's sad that he didn't get a chance to do that.
He was probably the most impressive player, receiver I've seen.
He's just a remarkable football player. And the country doesn't know anything about this guy. That's what's so sad.
He could have been a Hall of Famer, I think, but for the demons.
Poof, he just evaporated. He was gone.
Synanon, the drug and alcohol rehabilitation program, which has grown into a wealthy, powerful, and extremely strong-minded organization which considers itself to be a religion.
Warren Wells was a prize.
I suspect that he very well could have been a target. Almost certainly was.
These people are members of Synanon, a tax-exempt, non-profit corporation founded 20 years ago to help drug addicts and alcoholics.
Well, we knew that, why he was there. I mean, he wasn't there because he was a dope fiend. I mean, he wasn't a dope fiend.
We're your family now. That's not your family. We're your family.
Think of the dollar value of having Warren Wells in your utopian community.
The atmosphere was so volatile, I was afraid. I just had those spooky, violent vibes.
It turned into a cult. You're talking about weapons. They basically violated every one of their basic tenets.
I thought it was for real, they was going to kill us.
Mark Davis, he was real close to Warren. Warren told him they really stripped him of his manhood.
What did happen to Warren Wells? At the end of his life, he struggled to eat and walk without help, suffered from dementia, and couldn't speak but a few slurred words at a time.
You remember those two guys?
This story is one of an incredible athlete beaten down by games he never played. His story is the curious case of Warren Wells. More than any other organization in sports, the Oakland Raiders celebrate their history and lore. The final team to join when the original American Football League was founded in 1960. Their home, a crumbling concrete coliseum, was the final AFL facility to still host games. It's not haunted by ghosts of the past. Instead, it celebrates them. Legends like Big Ben, 00, the Mad Bomber, and the receiver with moves as smooth and swift as his name.
That was Warren Wells. He had that ability to take a little play into a big play.
He was smooth. He ran just as smooth as silk.
And he was like a ghost. You know, he'd run his route, and he's there, and then all of a sudden, he's gone.
He had a unique talent that when he got even, he was leaving.
Warren Wells had a way to run that he ran low and fast and didn't have to slow up to cut. And I mean, that's all the difference in the world. It would always come off full speed. And I don't know anyone else that's ever done that.
This is Beaumont, Texas, a city along the Natchez River, which rose, fell, and rose again with the oil and shipping business. This is more bayou than cow country, but it's still Texas to be sure. The railways running through the town tell the best tale of the history of this area. North America's first oil gusher, the Spindletop, spouted here. But at the 1970 National Council of Mayors, Beaumont's Ken Ritter bragged about another gushing pipeline.
The 16 professional football players turned out by high schools of Beaumont, Texas, constitute twice the amount any other city can claim. Now, therefore, I, Ken Ritter, Mayor of the city of Beaumont, Texas, do hereby officially proclaim Beaumont, Texas, the professional football capital of the world.
Warren Wells' family moved here from his birthplace of nearby Franklin, Louisiana. Their former home burned down. It's just a slab now. Father, Henry Wells, found work when demand for oil and shipbuilding was high. Mother Julia kept her 5 children, and most everyone in the neighborhood well-fed with excellent Southern cooking.
Crab meat and shrimp.
Warren lived his final years just a couple of miles away with sister-in-law Concetta and his nephew Wyron. Both cared for him every waking hour of the day.
It's a struggle, but it takes more than one person to handle his sickness. We have to help him dress, prepare his meals, get him up in the morning.
It's tough. It's tough. Being that with the dementia and all, the things that we have to do for him, it's really a full-time job. It's exhausting.
Just a relative fly pattern down the road is what used to be Warren's former school, Hebert High. Now renamed and integrated, like most Southern schools in the 50s, it was colored only. Separate, but hardly equal. However, the football was more than equal. Hebert's Panthers, coached by the legendary Clifton Ozan, lost only 15 games in 18 years.
Fire straight ahead on him, real hard in there. Let's go, bud. Down. Hip, hip. All right, all right.
Remember this field, man? This is where it all started at, huh? When you was playing, we called you the War Horse. You scored a lot of touchdowns in this field. You remember the Ozan, Coach Ozan and all?
Yes.
The Wells brothers, Warren, Russell, and Oscar, played most every sport for the Panthers. But Warren was special on a football field. He earned that nickname, Warhorse, when the team rode his talents to the Texas State Championship.
As a young girl, it was very exciting because I knew I was attending the same school where the Wells brothers were going to. We would all try to gather around to see Warren Wells, and especially when he'd catch those, those balls, I mean, he had a way, wow, his style.
That style was impaired by a first taste of alcohol at a post-championship game celebration, an introduction to a troublesome partner on his life's journey. Substance abuse was part of the parallel track, which would one day tragically converge with Wells' own.
Our defense has been an offense, and our offense is very offensive.
In 1958, a smooth-talking recovering alcoholic named Charles Dietrich started having self-help meetings at an Ocean Park, California garage called the TLC Club. They called the meetings seminars, a cross between symposiums and seminars. The premise was simple: no trained psychologists, no doctors, no oversight.
It was not doctor-patient. What it was other addicts that had cleaned up helping other addicts. So it was an each one, teach one philosophy. And that made sense to me because I had been to a lot of doctors, you know, and I knew they were full of because they didn't know what they were talking about, you know.
They were definitely non-professional. They weren't licensed, and that was on purpose.
Until further notice, no member of the California Department of Corrections is permitted on Synanon property unless he has the express permission of Charles Dieterich.
They didn't take government money, and so therefore they were not beholden to government agencies.
Ben Parks joined Synanon as the human potential movement took flight. John Stallone was in trouble as a heroin user in New York when he heard about Synanon from friends.
My friend says, you know what? He says, why don't you go out to California to that place that Richie was talking about? He said it was a great place that all you do all day long is just go out on the beach and lay on the beach, go swimming. He said that movie stars, actresses would come down and you could make out with them. That Richie was full of totally. I mean, none of what he said was true. Absolutely none of it.
Synanon called itself the people business, and its propaganda machine didn't just fool people who were addicts. It fooled both Life magazine, which did a 14-page spread, and Time, which printed that only 20% of addicts failed their treatment. Synanon was even the subject of a Hollywood movie in the 60s. But it was all just a make-believe story, one that was headed for an unhappy ending.
Dropping out and joining communes was something that was happening in the 60s. And so these made the situations ripe for something like Synanon or Scientology, you know, the Moonies for EST and a lot of the self-help groups.
Paul Morantz is an attorney and author who is an expert on cults in general, and Synanon in particular. He learned the dangers of Synanon firsthand, lessons that continue to affect his speech and health today.
My hands didn't go bad till 2012. I first developed a rare form of cancer in which the doctor said that that may have resulted from the poison.
There was violence. The sense was that we were surrounded by enemies, which was not true. They almost killed him.
He led the AFL in receiving yards, yards per catch, and touchdowns. Ladies and gentlemen, he's a bad man, Warren Wells.
In 2015, Texas Southern honored former players who made a mark in the NFL. Warren Wells took a while to shine at TSU, and even then, he was not the brightest star in this part of Texas. The eyes of pro football scouts were focused down the road at Prairie View A&M and their star receiver, Otis Taylor.
Well, they were both so good, but of course I'm partial to Warren.
He was able to do enough to get the right people's attention. The guy told him, hey man, your name on the board. So he looked at it and he said, oh man, I got drafted.
Wells may have felt lucky to be selected by the Detroit Lions in the 12th round of the 1964 NFL Draft, but that good fortune turned when another draft interrupted his football career. 29 NFL players served during the Vietnam War. More than a third of the ones drafted, like Wells, were poor and black. Though African Americans were 11% of the general population, they made up 23% of the troops in South Asia. In the Wells household, 100% of the young men served in the Army.
All three of the brothers were in the Army at the same time, and they couldn't send but one to war, and that was Russell. And Russell was shot. He had gotten a Purple Heart.
Warren served 2 years in Fairbanks, Alaska, was honorably discharged, and signed as a free agent by Kansas City of the fledgling AFL, a league that threw both long and often. Once again, he found himself in the shadow of Taylor, now an established all-league player with the Chiefs. This time, however, the projected comparisons to his fellow Texan worked in Wells' favor. He caught the attention of a rival, the Raiders' Al Davis.
Al was sitting in the room, calls me in, and is watching Kansas City play. And he showed me this play. He said, watch this player. Well, we all thought it was Otis Taylor, except it wasn't Otis Taylor. It was Warren Wells.
The scout that signed Warren Wells out of the Army was a guy named Lloyd Wells. Lloyd Wells called Al, and told him, I got this receiver here that the Chiefs are going to cut, and I want you to get him, because I think he can be pretty good.
Al said he's sure that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to cut him. She said, there is no way the Chiefs are going to cut a player of this caliber.
I was the first guy that met him, because 67 was my first year, and I was not only the linebacker coach, I was also the special teams coach. And so they wanted me to put him on special teams to see, how he'd be. On the first kickoff, he flew down there and made the tackle. And I thought, oh, well, I'm a heck of a special teams coach. I coached him one night. I mean, right off the bat, he was one of the best special teams players I've ever seen. You knew right then Warren Wells was a football player.
We got in from Kansas City, and the first day of practice, we practiced, and I'm looking saying, man, how in the world they let this guy go get out of Kansas City?
The first time I saw him on a football field in practice, in training camp, he was phenomenal.
Warren, he ran the route on me, and I still couldn't believe how in the world did he do that.
I was shocked at his overall football ability. I mean, he was a punter, he was a placement kicker, he was a backup quarterback, he was a wide receiver, and he could play defensive back. And I had never been around a person like that.
The defending AFL champs opened the 1968 season with Warren Wells as their starting split end. It was a wise move. He finished it with over 1,100 yards and led the league in touchdowns, including this record 94-yarder from aging backup quarterback George Blanda.
We could all look back and say we knew that Warren Wells was a great player, but the first guy that knew it, I think, was George Blanda.
Blanda back to pass. Blanda looks, Blanda throws. Complete touchdown, Wells. Raiders score.
And George was a cranky old guy. I mean, George didn't like a lot of people, but he sure as hell liked Warren Wells.
The outside world liked the way things seemed to be working at Synanon. Drug addicts and alcoholics were off the streets, so the donations rolled in.
We have trucks and land and buildings, and we got to get food and so on.
Members were required to give everything they owned to Synanon and provide free labor. That new wealth allowed Dietrich to acquire a fleet of vehicles, boats, planes, more land to build a compound in Marin County, and, just to be safe, nearly $60,000 worth of weapons from this San Francisco gun shop. Soon, as their journeys converged, Synanon would look to add another possession, Warren Wells.
Warren Wells was a prize. Warren Wells went to Synanon. The whole focus of the deal was, you're here, and we want you to stay forever.
At split end, number 81 from Texas Southern, Warren Wells.
It wasn't long before Warren Wells announced himself as the league's dominant offensive force. In his second season as a starter, he averaged close to 27 yards every time he touched the ball. Bill Walsh, then the offensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals, called Wells the most feared player in the AFL, an opinion shared by every defensive back in the league, including Hall of Famer Emmitt Thomas.
He was my worst nightmare, in my whole 13-year career. I hated playing against him, but it was a challenge.
The AFL in those days, so Warren exclusively had to go against man-to-man coverage, And it was always a mismatch when they used to have that big rival between Kansas City and Oakland Raiders, and Emmett Thomas was exclusively, trying to guard Warren Wells, and he was just unstoppable.
Warren had all the moves and very tough, but he was off quick and had great hands, and he was mentally tough.
Everyone respected Warren Wells. I mean, that was the thing. There was no weakness in his game, and like some guys run deep well, and they don't run medium patterns well. They don't run short, or they don't catch the ball inside. They don't like the collision. He liked the collision.
As an assistant, John Madden appreciated toughness. When he was promoted to head coach in 1969, he counted on it.
Our job is going to be to take the people that we've drafted, to develop them, and someday they're ready to play and be a very good Oakland Raider.
There were whispers questioning whether a 33-year-old defensive coach might stifle the Raiders' offense. Madden's first team answered loudly, leading both leagues in passing and total offense, and losing only one regular season game. Flanker Fred Bilenikoff caught 12 passes for touchdowns. That would have also led both leagues, except his teammate, split-end Warren Wells, had 14.
He was probably the most impressive player, receiver I've seen. We were a hell of a combination, to be honest with you.
That's exactly right. Totally different types, and but complemented each other beautifully. They were a lot of fun to watch. The tight end wasn't too bad either.
Watching Fred and Warren, it was like watching poetry. Fred was so precise, and Warren was so smooth. It was like getting a chance to watch Rembrandt and Picasso play. It literally was.
Wells, however, was beginning to paint outside the lines off the field. Some of his Raider teammates were legendary for crossing swords with the law. For Wells, it was a continuation of his troubling patterns with alcohol.
He was a terrific teammate, great guy. Where Warren got into trouble was when he'd go out with the guys.
They were very loose. They were very, they were real characters, a lot of them. I mean, Davis didn't ask anything of them but that they played well on Sunday.
That aptly describes the Raiders. They would go from the football field to the police lineup and back and win every Sunday.
Most guys in those days could drink, and that was the number one recreational activity. Was to go out after practice, after games, whatever, and throw down a few. And Warren would try to hang with them, and alcohol and him just didn't get along.
For his first 27 years, Warren Wells overcame many obstacles. But on the night of April 19, 1969, he encountered or created one that changed his life forever. Wells attended a party near Oakland's MacArthur Freeway with a group of women planning a charity fashion show. He said he remembered having a couple of drinks and little else.
He would change when he had a couple of drinks in him, and not for the better.
One of the hosts of the party told a grand jury that Wells tried to sexually assault her. The jurors believed enough of the story to send the case to trial. Attorney Stanley Gold attended the same synagogue as Al Davis, who hired him to defend Wells. Gold's son, Ivan, was a boy at the time. Now he's also a criminal defense attorney.
There were some questions about if Warren was having an affair with this woman, and there were a lot of legal issues, and the case was iffy on certain points.
Well, I can tell you what the players all thought, and what I thought too at the time. It was a put-up job.
Warren was extremely popular, especially among the ladies. I mean, there was not any need for Warren to strong-arm anybody.
That was during the Black Panther and the Hells Angels and all that stuff that was the free speech movement in Cal. So I think there were a lot of factors working against Warren.
Free Huey or else! Free Huey or else!
Oakland was the epicenter of Black Panther Party protests against police brutality. The judge hearing Wells' case, Leonard Deaton, was well known to the Panthers. 5 years earlier, he had sentenced one of the party's founders, Huey Newton, to jail, a case later overturned by the Superior Court. On Gold's advice, Wells decided not to take a chance in Deaton's court. He pled guilty and accepted 3 years of probation so he could play the next season.
The defendant has pled guilty to the charges and will be sentenced to 3 years probation.
Of course you want to continue to play, then of course you're going to take, even if you're completely innocent, you're probably going to take probation if there's a possibility of going to state prison.
You must not indulge in the use of intoxicants or visit any establishment that serves alcohol as a primary source of business.
What we thought was the whole idea of Warren pleading guilty was kind of like a plea bargain. The trial potential was really a drag and a distraction. And one thing that Al Davis was a real stickler on is he didn't like distractions.
I do know that Al tried to help him to keep him out of jail and get him back on course.
Wells did continue his steady course on the field, gaining nearly 1,000 yards receiving for the third straight year and scoring 11 touchdowns, including one many say was the best catch they've ever seen.
Oh, I remember that catch. Oh, yeah, it was absolutely beautiful.
We were playing the New York Jets in New York, Shea Stadium.
It was cold, man, and it was a tough game playing against Joe Namath, you know, and Don Maynard and those guys like that.
It's 13-7 New York. 8 seconds to go.
Man sitting in a play from the sideline.
LaMonica comes in. Wells is back in for Biletnikoff.
We're in the huddle, and Darryl looks to the end of the huddle. Warren, he says, can you beat that guy on and up? And Warren says, yeah, I can beat him confidently. And I called a 91 up. Darryl says, when do you want me to throw the ball? When you're 20 yards or 30 yards down the field? He says, no, just throw it as far as you can throw it. He says, and I'll run underneath it. Darryl kind of turned his head to the end of the huddle where Warren was standing and said, okay, buddy, I'm going to do that.
Loose quarterback coverage. They're way off. They don't want to give up the bomb. LaMonica's back.
I threw the ball about 60 yards.
He's throwing deep.
They had him pretty much, as much as two guys can surround a guy.
For Wells in traffic.
In some kind of way, Warren at the last minute, he just reached over it.
It's better.
He caught it kind of like with one hand and brought it in.
Wells catches the ball. Wells has caught the ball.
He ended up making a miraculous catch in the end zone.
3 New York Jets. 3 of them were all over Wells. Wells caught it, falling down. I don't believe it.
Touchdown.
This is ridiculous. This is utterly ridiculous.
Warren was lethal out there. He was unbelievable. You know, when he went out there and made up his mind to beat people, nobody's going to cover him.
The Oakland Raiders have come out of nowhere, out of absolute, utter, and certain defeat, to defeat the New York Jets. The Raiders 14, the Jets 13.
Thanks to Wells and George Blanda, the 1970 Raiders made it to the first AFC championship. The two hooked up on this touchdown late in that game. Sadly, it would be the final time Warren Wells touched the ball as an Oakland Raider. An East Bay newspaper later reported it was the last time he caught anything, including a break.
I felt sorry for him. He didn't trust people. It turns out he was right not to.
This part of southeastern Texas doesn't just produce football players and oil. It's fertile ground for legendary musicians like Janis Joplin and Warren's cousin, Barbara Lynn, who had a #1 R&B single in the early 60s, You'll Lose a Good Thing.
If you should lose me, oh yeah, you'll lose a good thing, yeah.
The Raiders were about to lose a very good thing indeed, and it all started with that boast from Beaumont's mayor.
Beaumont, Texas, the professional football capital of the world.
It seemed a lighthearted stunt, but it turned dark at an event when the city saluted the 16 pro players who made it proud. Bubba Smith, Mel Farr, and others joined Warren Wells on stage. But just after the festivities, a young woman emerged from the shadows.
She walks over to the table and she basically says, "Do you want to see me stab somebody here?" And then she just took the knife and went right by and pierced Warren Wells' heart.
Though he survived, police reports confirmed Wells was in a bar, a violation of his probation. And that rarely enforced technicality ended up as the deepest and most damaging cut of all.
In Texas at that time on a Sunday, after 1 o'clock, alcohol cannot be sold anymore. Just the fact that he was in that bar and was stabbed in the heart, that led Judge Deaton to revoke his probation. And he liked to be a tough guy, and he was known as a tough judge, so he held on to that case and a few others too.
It was unusual for the sentencing judge to also hear a probation violation, but the stabbing and 2 traffic violations involving alcohol had Judge Deaton calling Wells back to his courtroom, an unforgiving place where only one person was looked upon with favor.
I don't know if I say he liked himself, but he certainly was impressed with himself.
East Bay attorney Spencer Strelis joined his partner Gold in defending Wells' probation violation. Today, Strelis' body is dulled by Parkinson's disease, but his memory of the Wells case is sharp.
If I recall correctly, he was arrested and taken into custody immediately after an All-Star game, which never should have happened. He was not a flight risk. He wasn't going to run away. And it was done expressly at the request of the judge. I think Warren was of no interest to anybody except a passing pawn in a game he was not even playing.
Judge Deaton was a friend of Raiders principal owner Wayne Valley, who perhaps not coincidentally was in the midst of a bitter battle with partners Ed McGaw and Al Davis over control of the team. Strelis and Gold had affidavits claiming that even before the hearing, Deaton told Valley and the Raider team doctor that he was going to keep Wells from playing. They wanted Deaton disqualified.
And for a judge to say that in public without hearing the evidence, it shows clear bias. You can't say you're going to find somebody guilty of a probation violation without doing a hearing. You can't just say that.
The judge denied making the statement. Gold's request for a different judge to hear the case, perhaps future Mayor Lionel Wilson, was also denied. Gold pleaded with the judge that Wells was a hero in Oakland one day, but was treated as just a nigger in the South the next. Deaton sternly replied that the Raiders star has simply run out of chances.
Football is not the most important thing in the world. You understand you may never play professional football again?
I was there in open court, and Judge Deaton said to Warren, "I'm not impressed, I'll never forget, I'm not impressed that you're a football player. You being a football player doesn't impress me. And the fact that you have a Cadillac, a 1970 Cadillac, brand new, that doesn't impress me." And he ordered him to sell that car as part of his sentence. This is what we're talking, it's demeaning.
Deaton kept to his promise not to let Wells play in a most curious manner. After a short stay in jail, he sent him to a new age treatment facility called Synanon.
There are no bars at Synanon House, but if you walk out of there, you will walk into state prison. Am I clear?
Judge Deaton did to make Warren live in Synanon. I mean, he wanted to make sure he couldn't play anymore.
So now here you have this judge in 1971. What do we know about Synanon? It doesn't believe it can cure anybody. Who sends somebody to rehab where the rehab says, "Yeah, we'll take care of you, but if you want help, you got to stay here for the rest of your life"? Your Honor, I think you should go somewhere else. You know, I mean, I think you're making a mistake, Judge. Said I'm not coming back no more, baby. No, 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 no.
What happens when one of football's best players is taken down and out of the game? What happens when his mind is preyed upon by leaders of a dangerous cult. What happened to Warren Wells?
You remember your coach?
Mm-hmm.
Remember your coach, John Madden?
Mm-hmm.
He was a great coach, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Memories can be a curious thing. Like the trails and tracks in Beaumont, they can be weathered and worn away by time until they simply fade away. Warren Wells' stroke and dementia made his memories even more elusive, but they were still there if you looked and listened closely.
This place called Synanon?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Was it a good place or a bad place?
Mm-hmm.
Warren Wells walks into a place that, you know, I'm sure he had no idea what he was walking into. I sure didn't.
There was talk of, like, you know, that Warren Wells was going to come into Synanon. I said, are you kidding me, man? They said, yeah, he's had some problems, so they're going to bring him. So John Madden came down and brought him in.
John Madden came down to poke around and visit and talk to a lot of us. Sat out on the beach.
I visited him a couple times, yeah. And those are the days that weren't very good. No, I mean, you're not okay. I mean, you're not normal. You're not the same guy.
I guess he got worse and started getting into closing in more and spacing out more.
He was sometimes not very responsive. He'd stand and stare into space, and the guys would just pull him along.
One day on the beach, a chance to show his athletic talents woke Wells from his stupor. Synanon residents got a close-up look at what the NFL has seen for the past 4 years.
The change was pretty amazing. Somebody tosses a football over our heads. Warren leaps straight up in the air. It's like a frog going after a fly with his tongue. His arm went out. We pulled down. We were like, wow, did you see that? He shot straight up in the air.
An Adonis, man. See him at the beach. He was just, you know, physically just an amazing specimen.
This guy's in fabulous shape, even though he's out of it, you know.
Envision trying to stop a train. It was like, boom. I mean, you were flying, and everybody was flying in the sand, you know?
Wow. You know, we realized, you know, this is a professional athlete.
I know. I mean, he wasn't hitting us like he would in a game. Like, you know, we were like toys. It was amazing.
For Wells and others, the fun on the beach would soon give way to another game. This one, mandatory at Synanon. A group exercise in which counselors and members would engage in attack therapy. Its name was as simple as it was dangerous. The game.
Wow. A long time's gonna be. The game.
I hated those games. I hated them. I could barely wait till they were over.
Normally, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, games. Games lasted about an hour and a half. In the games, you could talk about anything. You would call each other on each other's bull.
You can say that, Hardy! Take your
It's called a game because the person tries to defend himself being ganged up on and everyone else.
They were really doing psychic surgery on people. You never know how a person takes it, but you're being criticized, you're being ridiculed, cursed at. For some people, that's a lot of pressure.
The idea is that the game was supposed to rip away defenses and make a person see himself.
Everyone in the group, and the group might be 8 to 12 people, would join in the attack on the person who was the target at the moment. Criticisms coming from 360 degrees around you, so fast and so intense that you couldn't really deal with it.
Richard Offshee is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of California, Berkeley, and one of the world's foremost experts on coercive social control. He cites a 1973 study which showed that attack therapy, like the game, could be more than harmful to vulnerable individuals like Wells. It could be deadly.
It was these intensive encounter groups, particularly the Synanon groups, that precipitated the major breaks with reality, the major damages. 8% of the people who took part in that study turned out to be casualties. Some had psychotic breaks, one suicided.
The danger of participating in Synanon was that it used brainwashing. They were taking people to the mental ward all the time who went zombie-like, you know.
Withdrawn, perhaps ashamed, fragile, did the game push Warren Wells into further personal depths?
Warren would be made fun of over his football playing. Anybody who had any particular skill, that would have to be taken away.
There are also people who definitely targeted him, because I know some of those guys and they were just mean. I'm sure there was jealousies there. He's an athlete, you know, he's famous and so on. How could you mess that up?
The more he could lose confidence in himself, the higher the likelihood would be that he could be kept and used.
It was still part of the dialogue. You know, you'll never make it, you know, apart from us, you'll never make it.
I mean, he was a prize. Think of the publicity value, think of the dollar value of having Warren Wells in your utopian community.
Warren Wells, nonetheless, got something from Synanon few others did. After 6 months, he got out. He left just in time for the familiar territory of Raiders training camp in Santa Rosa. For Wells, however, the journey back was burdened with both physical and psychological baggage.
He just seemed to be emotionally void.
He really wasn't Warren Wells anymore. He was somebody else.
That 1 year was just too overwhelming, you know, and trying to come back from that whole situation, I really don't believe it was working.
Everything seemed to be in slow motion with Warren when he came back.
He wasn't the same guy. I mean, he wasn't the same guy. I thought when we first started, I thought, well, he's, you know, hasn't played, he's getting in shape and he's getting warmed up. And I said, okay, you know, it's time to pull the cork. You know, you got to start running now, you know. And he goes, I am running. I said, no. I said, run full speed. He said, I'm going full speed. I said, no, you're not. You're not close to it.
You know something was wrong because sometimes he would run a route and he'd be like the old Warren Wells, and the next time he would run a route and he'd just stop in the middle of it.
After one practice, Ray Chester, who had a locker next to Wells, tried to figure out what was wrong with his teammate.
He was just sitting there, you know, and eyes kind of like just dazed and whatever. And I said, Warren, I said, like, what's wrong, man? What's up? And he said to me, he said, Ray, they wouldn't even let me go see my mother. And he was talking about time he had spent in Synanon.
Within weeks, the Raiders placed their former star receiver on waivers.
I knew he couldn't play. I mean, there was no way, whether he decided not to play or he couldn't play anymore.
He just kind of faded away. He was like a cloud that just floated away.
It was like, where did he go? We never heard from him again. What a shame.
As Warren Wells was trying to find his way without football, his former Synanon associates were struggling with changes in the organization. Chuck Diedrich's wife, Betty, had died. He remarried and mandated that every Synanon couple separate and be matched with a new partner.
They wanted to take my wife away and give me another wife. And then they wanted to play wife swapping. I says, I'm out of here, I'm gone.
Gone, too, was Synanon's focus on rehabilitation. Diedrich had everyone shave their heads as the organization was reclassified as a religion, one that only worshiped making and keeping money. He decreed that children were a poor economic investment. Men were forced to have vasectomies. Pregnant women given abortions. Troublesome teenagers were confined to barracks for punks. All other children were taken away from their parents to be raised in hatcheries where they received little attention except abuse.
My son, at the time he was an infant, I think he was about 2 years old, they had said that they were going to take all the kids and take them all up to Tomales Bay. I didn't want to donate my kid, man, to it. And I had no idea at the time that it would turn into, like, you know, a hellhole for kids.
Slowly, I began to learn about the violence, about the beating of children.
Fresh out of law school, Paul Morantz won a case extricating 3 kids from Synanon for a Detroit grandmother. His reward? Inspiring Dietrich's wrath, which the leader made clear via threats on eternal radio broadcast. The listeners included a group called the Imperial Marines, trained in violence and ready to strike like a viper.
Don't mess with us. You can get killed dead. Physically dead.
The LAPD found a tape that seemed to be the founder sanctioning that sort of thing.
And I'm quite willing to break some lawyer's legs and then tell him the next time I'm going to break your wife's legs. Then I'm going to cut your kid's arm off. And try me, because this is only a sample. You son of a bitch, like that. And that's the end of your lawyer.
I told the press that Synanon was going to try to kill me, so I thought that that appeared in the newspapers. Synanon would have to call it off or prove me right.
I would certainly not institute anything like that, but I have no way of preventing it if it would happen.
2 young Imperial Marines went after Morantz with a very curious murder weapon.
Dietrich chose the rattlesnake. They also had a hitman, price of $10,000, but they chose the rattlesnake.
They cut the rattle off, put it in his mailbox.
I was searching under my car, careful crossing the streets, you know, making sure my dogs barked before I entered my house. I mean, and here it was, an in-the-wall mailbox, and I wasn't wearing my glasses. And I knew something was stuffed odd in there. If I'd been wearing glasses, I probably would have seen that it was a snake.
In Los Angeles, a lawyer who recently won a $300,000 court judgment against the Synanon Foundation reached into the mailbox in front of his suburban house. There was a rattlesnake in it. He was bitten on the hand. He was near death, but he is now recovering.
Those people who put the snake in my mailbox do not think of themselves as criminals, I'm sure, but believe themselves to be serving a higher purpose, as did Manson's group.
Morantz wasn't the only person they about killed. Law enforcement is not doing their job. Here are all these events, and they don't seem to realize it's all coming from the same place, and there's a pattern here that's really fairly alarming.
Local journalist Dave Mitchell shared a Pulitzer with his wife Kathy and Richard Offstreet for coverage of Dietrich's activity in the Point Reyes Light, a small-town newspaper near Synanon's Marin compounds. Their coverage and that of national outlets like Time Magazine and NBC Nightly News led government agencies to investigate and ultimately shut down Synanon.
And some of the activities on its land in Marin County north of San Francisco and elsewhere have come to the attention of the authorities.
In a 1982 deposition, Dietrich admitted, quote, "I don't know how to cure an addict or alcoholic. I never did."
Warren Wells, the greatest wide receiver in pro football. I could only say, based upon my knowledge of Synanon, from the attacks on the Synanon game, that his pre-existing problems resulted in a psychotic break, of which that he probably never got treated for the rest of his life.
Warren Wells never found his way without football. Synanon, too, was lost and crumbled without Chuck Dietrich. He died in 1997. Its 2 Marin compounds now serve as a luxury conference center and a nature education camp for middle schoolers. a far cry from the barracks once labeled punks. The Santa Monica facility, which housed Wells, has also been ironically rehabbed into a posh hotel, the Del Mar.
Like the white uniforms or the black uniforms?
Black, yeah. Wells' transformation wasn't as simple. He put his demons behind him. He didn't have a drink in the last decade of his life. He needed to regularly see doctors and a chiropractor to soothe his body after years of violent hits in football. But his mind paid the highest price.
The brain gets traumatized, his neck gets traumatized through licks that he took in football, NFL. Basically, his brain is inflamed, it destroys neural pathways, and this is what we're left with.
Wells was also part of another cruel game. He was one of 1,700 players who filed to receive a portion of the concussion settlement the NFL was ordered to pay in 2017. So far, less than 10% were approved for payments.
It's clearly that he's suffering from the concussions that he received over the years of playing football. Hopefully the NFL will decide and really start taking a personal look at it instead of being like a number or a piece of paper, and realize that these families out here are hurting and they need it. They need the assistance.
Wide receiver number 81, Warren Wells.
Warren Wells is undoubtedly part of Raiders lore. In honor of his military service, he lit the Al Davis Eternal Flame when the NFL honored the armed services. But he's not remembered as a hero. The mistakes he made in games which had nothing to do with his sport robbed him of the opportunity to do the one thing he did best: play football. Most who knew Warren Wells say that's more than enough punishment.
It's just a sad story. The memories that I have of Warren Wells, I love.
Enduring love, elusive memories, opposing yet converging forces in the curious case of Warren Wells. His story takes us from Beaumont to Oakland and back, like the well-worn tracks that lead through rough terrain and home again.
If his life or his career had lasted a little bit longer, he would have been wearing a gold jacket.
He certainly would have been a Hall of Fame. His bust would be in Canton.
Surely he was on his way being a Hall of Famer.
Oh, absolutely. A Hall of Fame.
I agree with him. I mean, he had everything.
Absolutely. No question about it.
No doubt. No doubt.
My time with the Raiders now is 25 football season. I never saw a better football athlete than Warren Wells.
Warren Wells could have been the best deep receiver in the NFL.
If he could have played long enough, he could have been the greatest wide receiver that ever played.